Welcome to the Garden Angelist, where we talk about flowers, veggies, and all the best dirt. I'm Dee Nash in Guthrie, Oklahoma.
And I'm Carol Michael in Indianapolis, Indiana. Good morning, Dee.
Good morning, Carol. How is the world treating you?
The world is treating me like a princess today.
Beautiful weather in Indiana?
Of course. You know I tell you that Indiana is paradise.
Well, guess what? Oklahoma is paradise right now, too, because we had that little cold front that came through, and now everything's beautiful again, and I even see butterflies out there, and the leaves are changing, and the skies are blue. It just couldn't be any better.
Same here. We had a cold snap. We've had 2 frosts in my neck of the woods, and butterflies are flying about. I actually saw a praying mantis eating a butterfly the other day, which was kind of gross, but that's nature.
Yeah, that's always a little gross, especially because they turn and look at you and you think, if you were bigger, you'd probably kill me and eat me too.
Yeah, he was lucky I didn't kill him and eat him. Not eat him.
Ew.
Didn't kill him and just leave
That's
him.
gross.
I wouldn't eat bugs.
Yeah, well, you let him or her live.
Exactly. I'm benevolent that way.
And that's nice of you. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, but whatever. So I see we have a poem today by one of our favorite poetresses.
Yes. This is by Emily Dickinson. It's called The Tulip, but it probably has a number. She slept beneath the tree, remembered but by me. I touched her cradle mute. She recognized the foot, put on her carmine suit, and see.
I love it.
And it's about a red tulip.
It is about a red tulip. I love how she touched her cradle mute. That means she patted it with her foot because she had tucked the bulb in there.
Right.
Sweet.
And so in a few weeks, I'm going to be tucking in some tulip bulbs.
Me too. Right about Thanksgiving. I have a busy November, but because I have a baby shower, a wedding to go to, and I'm going to do Thanksgiving dinner. So it's going to be busy, but I'm still going to plant my tulips. I got garlic in the mail.
Good.
And, Kate, but before I don't want to talk about garlic. I know we've already talked about that. But I did want to talk just a bit and say that I got my seeds in for my meadow. But maybe we should discuss that later in the podcast.
We'll discuss that when we talk about seeds.
Cool. Good idea. You're always so organized.
Thank you. We're going to talk about tulips, and there are tons of tulips out there. If you go to the store and you buy tulips, you're probably just buying the big hybrid tulips.
Mm-hmm. And you may be getting smaller bulb sizes too.
Yes.
And bulbs are all about the size of the bulb. So you should really buy the biggest and best bulb you can buy.
Right. And for us, we use mail order sources like Color Blends, Brent and Becky's bulbs, John Sheeper's, Van England. We use those sources because we always get top-size bulbs that way.
Right, because they get the very best. The ones that are packaged and put in nurseries are not bad bulbs, and I've grown them many times. I get better bulbs when I order online.
Yes, but one of my favorite childhood memories is going to the garden center with my dad, and they had all the tulips and daffodils and crocuses. They had all the bulbs out in big bins, and we would get these white paper bags and fill them up with a dozen of this and a few of those, and we'd label the bags as we went, and those were fun times.
I bet that was. You went with your dad.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would be a great thing. Nobody in my family gardened except for my grandparents, and so I only remember going to the nursery in the spring. Occasionally with my mom, we would go to Moselle's Fort Haven because Mom would kind of get the itch in spring, but by the time summer heat hit, she was kind of done.
So when you go to the store and you buy a bag of bulbs,
right?
It's like a bag of a dozen bulbs, and you think, oh, tulips. And so, Dee, I'm going to give you a litany of types of tulips, blow your mind. It's not that complicated. Are you ready?
It's not. I'm ready.
There's single earlies, double earlies, the Triumph group, the Darwin hybrid group, single lates, lily flowered, fringed, viridiflora, which are the green tulips, the Rembrandt group.
The ones that have green on them.
The parrot group, double late group, Kaufmania group, Fosteriana group, Gregii group, And then the species tulips, of which there are several different kinds. And so
Right.
it can get confusing.
You've now totally confused our listeners. They're going, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what to buy."
Here's what I would advise. If you're going to buy tulips is decide what color you want, because they literally come in every color. And then decide, do I want late, mid-season, or early? Because by getting some early and some mid-season and some late, you'll have some tulips blooming, like in my area, from about middle of April, and I've had them blooming all the way to mid-May. So you can get a pretty good month and a half of tulip blooms by choosing.
That's about the same here. And I do that. I either buy a blend, or I used to plan all this out and buy early, mid, late and work really hard at it. But sometimes that was unpredictable, so I started buying blends. But it's the same idea, but they just mix them for you. But keep going.
Well, and then the species, the difference between hybrids and species for me is tulips tend to be a lot smaller flowers.
Right?
And they return reliably for me. The hybrid tulips are going to be the great big ones that you see, that you think of, there's a tulip. But they often are annuals around here, meaning that the second year they may come up, but there'll be far fewer blooms, and they just tend to peter out. So a lot of people treat them as annuals, and they'll pull them out.
I treat them as annuals. And honestly, for me, because of my heat in the summertime and because I continue to water, species tulips do not always come back for me either. They might come back for a couple of years, like Lady Jane was a good example. I had it for several years, and then eventually they peter out. But the big tulips, the big bold tulips, they tend to be annuals. And now that we've said this, somebody's going to write in and say, but mine come back every year. And there are some varieties occasionally that will return. I had some yellow ones that came in a mix from Brent and Becky's, and they came back for 5 solid years. But that's unusual in my state.
That is. And it tends to be the older hybrid varieties that come back year after year. The newer ones, they don't. And if you go to a big public display of bulb planting, and wherever you are in the country, unless you're like way over in California or way south in Florida, but most places they have a big tulip display in the spring. And here at Newfields, they'll plant, I don't know, a gazillion bulbs. They pull all those out when they're done. They don't overwinter them.
And there's nothing wrong with that, because you need a place to put some annual flowers, which in Oklahoma means tropical flowers usually. You'll want some places to put those in, and the tulips kind of hold that space for you. And what I do is I just yank them out of the front of the bed, and then I just put something in behind them, like a summer snapdragon or some other plant that is not perennial.
Right. And so you bought a collection this year.
I did.
French Blend Rose from Color Blends.
Yeah, right. Color Blends actually gave me 200 bulbs, and then I bought another 200 because I wanted 400. I have a big garden. So we're doing a deal together, and French Blend Rose is a mix of dark pink, and kind of an apricot. That's one of my favorite color combinations. One of my other favorite color combinations is purple and orange. I love purple and orange tulips together, which I've done many times too.
Right. And I bought the Princely mix from Van Engelen, and I bought 200. And it's a mix of Candy Prince, which is a blush pink, Purple Prince, which is a lilac purple, and Sunny Prince, which is lemon yellow, not the bright yellow, it's a softer yellow. And I bought them because they're single early. They should bloom mid-April, and that's when Easter is next year. So I'm planting them strictly so I have a display for Easter. And then I plant them differently than you do. I don't bed them out as one big bed. I plant them in and amongst perennials in my perennial border.
Well, I do too. Mine are in my perennial borders, but they're just usually they're toward the front, but like my garage bed, they're also mixed in with daffodils. And so the truth is, it's a mixed border by the time it's done because the daffodils come back every year.
Right. We're going to talk about daffodils next week.
Yay.
So I am adopting we'll call it the Jacqueline Vanderkloot style of planting bulbs. And I think we talked about this a little bit, but unlike all the articles tell you to leave everything just alone in your perennial border until spring, I cut it all back.
You cut it down.
And these aren't huge beds. They're like 10 by 10 or 10 by 15. I cut it all back, and then I'll take those 200 bulbs and I'll mix them up, and then I'll literally throw them into the perennial bed and plant them wherever they land.
Right, and I've done that before too, and actually done it with a mix. That's how that garage border started. Before I had much in it, I just threw the bulbs down. And we should explain the reason you're cutting back is so that you have room to find where to plant things. And I'll say this, all my butterfly people, don't be upset with me, but in the few, I have 1, 2, 3 beds that I actually plant tulips in. And in those beds, I cut everything back too. Now, I leave huge areas of my garden just fallow through the winter so that the little bees and other bugs have places to nest in the stems of my various perennials. But I do cut these back because I can't see where to put the bulbs. So, I have to cut a little bit of it back.
Right. And I cut it all back. And I just assume that somebody else, someplace else in the neighborhood's leaving stuff standing, which is not likely in my neighborhood. I have probably the most perennials of anybody. Does that surprise you, Dee?
No. You have the most of everything in your neighborhood. I've actually been to your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And, yeah. But you know what? In my neighborhood, nobody gardens but me. Now, there's a couple of people who make vegetable gardens. People in Oklahoma don't grow vegetable gardens. They make them. They make vegetable gardens and they plow it up every year and they do all that. But that's not how I garden. So I garden differently from anyone else.
Yes. You do. You are different than anybody else, Dee.
I'm unique.
So the other thing that I ordered more species tulips because I like them as well. And 2 of my favorites, you mentioned Lady Jane, which is Tulipa clusiana, Lady Jane, and it's a pink and white striped tulip, and
with really pretty blue-green foliage.
Yes.
Its foliage comes up. It's real stripy, not stripy. It's narrow. The leaves are narrow. It's very pretty.
Yes, and it has sort of a lot of people say it's a lily type look to the actual tulip. So I have those in one bed in the back. And then I bought another 50 of the woodland tulips, which is Tulipa sylvestris. And this is a yellow tulip, and this one almost people think it's a lily because it kind of has a little bend to the stem and the flower kind of faces down. Then when it's sunny, the flower will open up and face up. But I've got these in the front, and I'm trying to get them to naturalize around the crabapple tree up by my front walk, which is kind of a woody area, or I said shady area. So I got some more of those.
Are you going to dip yours in anything, or are you going to put plant skid on them or anything to stop voles?
I have some plant skid, so I will probably coat them with a little bit of plant skid because that's an area where there are squirrels and probably a few voles might go through there. So I will do that as a protection against them.
That's a good idea.
In the spring, I don't think the rabbits like to eat the tulips, but they'll bite them off, and then I'll go and I'll find a tulip stem just lying on the ground.
Right. So you can spray your tulips as they come up. I think you just said that, didn't you? You can spray your tulips as they come up, and then as you spray them, nothing wants to touch them, but unless there's a dog in your neighborhood, they might want to dig them up.
Yeah, that plant skid, and I will tell people when you spray that, and I've sprayed that around my front porch. I was trying to keep the squirrels away from the bird feeders and all, and it will smell for a little bit like there's a dead body around, but the dead smell goes away eventually.
Yeah, it's sort of like when you use fish emulsion to fertilize something. Like in the middle of summer, sometimes I'll spray fish emulsion with a hose-in sprayer, and it smells really bad. It smells like a bad pond for about 2 days, and then it gets better.
Right. So the other thing we want to say about tulips is you can also plant these in pots, and I have not done that because I don't have a real good place to keep them cool without freezing.
Right.
So
I have done that. There's a couple of different ways to do it. You can bring them and force them inside after you've cooled them off. And if you live where I live, you're probably going to put them in a refrigerator to do that. I don't think forcing tulips personally is as easy as forcing hyacinths, but we have a friend who does it all the time. Our friend Elizabeth Licata from Garden Rant, she does hundreds of tulips because she doesn't have a huge garden. She puts them all in pots and she forces some inside, but then some of them she leaves in her nice cool basement in Buffalo, and then she just brings them out the regular time and lets them bloom. Now I have done that too, and what I did is I put them on the south side of my greenhouse, and then I put like hay bales around them so they got cold, but they didn't freeze and crack my pots. But if you're going to do that outside and try that, which I'm all for, try new things. Why not? Put a grid across the top of them and weight it down with a rock, because last year when I did it, I had 2 or 3 successful years. And then last year the squirrels got into them and caused a huge mess, and then things didn't bloom.
Right. And we should note that when you say basement, Elizabeth has an unheated cellar. Not a...
Oh, yeah, I shouldn't say like a basement, it's not finished. It's not a finished
an unheated
basement.
cellar. Almost if you had a root cellar, that would be a great place to put pots of bulbs that you were trying to force and then bring them out later in the spring.
Which I don't have, so anything that I decide to force, I have to put it in the refrigerator and then keep it cold for 8 weeks and then bring it in.
Dee, I'm going to suggest that you dig up a root cellar out there in the country. You got space for it.
You can suggest all you want to, but I don't need a hidey hole because I have a basement that's finished out. And I don't like root cellars because they're creepy and they have way too many spiders in them.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that you, those are invalid reasons. I want you to have a root cellar because I can't have a root cellar.
I have a greenhouse. You can't have a greenhouse. That's the best I can do.
All right, darn it. One other thing about tulips is if you buy them in the store, and they're perfectly good to buy at the florist or sometimes the grocery store, when you buy tulips as a potted plant, get them in bud. They will bloom. Don't buy them in bloom. They won't last very long. And if you buy cut flowers, definitely buy them in bud, and they will gradually open up. And the stems will actually continue to grow after they're cut.
And if you've noticed when you plant them outside, next year look, because your tulips, when they first come up, look really short. Daffodils kind of do this too. And then they keep growing as the flower blooms. And so my tulips will start out kind of short, and then after they start to bloom, they're growing on the stem, and they get taller and taller.
Yes. Very good point. So that's tulips. Dee, you got anything else to say about these?
Just that everything wants to eat tulips. Everything wants to eat tulips. And so I would definitely put some plant skid on them or try some other method as a barrier. Some people put them in chicken wire. Other people put expanded shale. I mean, there's a lot of different ways people do it. It's just how much do you want to do? And there's some really good methods to plant tulips. One of my favorites is a bulb auger that you can attach to a drill. And a bulb auger is a really easy way to plant a whole lot of tulips at once, but it takes some real work. And then the other thing is I got sent this really cool thing in the mail. I'm showing it to Carol right now. It's kind of noisy. You can hear it clanking. It's called a Pro Plugger. A Pro Plugger, and a Pro Plugger, you stand on it and you plant a whole bunch of tulips that way, and it has these rings on it, and the rings give you the planting depth. So that's another good idea. I have not tried it yet, but I know it'll work because it's the same idea as the bulb auger. But if you don't want to plant that many tulips, you could use a Pro Plugger planting tool. So I'm giving a shout out to these nice people who sent it to me.
Very good. And also, I just sometimes dig a hole with a trowel.
I have done the dig a hole with a trowel too, but after 400 bulbs, girl, that's a lot. That's a lot of holes with a trowel, and my wrist starts to hurt.
Right. And the other thing is, if you're going to plant a big bed and it's only tulips in there, just dig the whole thing all at once, lay all the tulips out, and then cover them up.
That's how that's how all the botanical gardens do it. They just have beds for that, and they plant them with annuals for color in the summer, and in the spring, well, the fall, they dig all that up and they just lay them out, and then they throw a whole bunch of compost and stuff on top, mash it all down, and they go on down the road.
Good deal. So speaking of planting, and you mentioned seeds, shall we move on to veggies, which is not really going to be veggies, but about seed sowing in the fall?
Yeah, let's do. Do you want me to do the?
Yes, we have another poem by Emily Dickinson, number 1255.
Why did she number her poems?
She didn't, I don't know if she numbered them or when they found them after she died, because most of her poems weren't published during her lifetime. I think that
Right.
they maybe didn't have titles, and so they put numbers on them.
Emily Dickinson was kind of a recluse,
Yes.
so she didn't care so much about whether they were published or not.
Right.
And she did love to garden. Okay, Longing is like the seed by Emily Dickinson. Longing is like the seed that wrestles in the ground, believing if it intercede, it shall at length be found. The hour and the clime, each circumstance unknown, what constancy must be achieved before it see the sun. Wow,
Isn't that neat?
it is neat.
So fall and winter seed sowing.
I'm still thinking about it.
Go ahead and think about it.
Okay, I'm done.
So this isn't strictly about vegetables, because that season is rapidly winding down.
Right.
Fall and winter seed sowing is really about sowing seeds for a lot of wildflowers and perennials. And these are the types of seeds that need to have cold before they germinate. And that's called stratification, to get that cold.
Nice big word there.
Yes, and the reason for this is nature's way of keeping a seed from falling to the ground in late fall, germinating, and then freezing its proverbial roots off because it's way too cold. So the seed knows until it's been through a cold period, don't germinate.
Right. Perennial milkweeds are a good example of this. They definitely need that in order to germinate. And in Oklahoma, a lot of people, because they'll want to start them in pots ahead of time and then put them in the garden where they want them, they'll put them in their refrigerator and keep them and then put them out later. But can I talk about my meadow?
Talk about your meadow.
I am so excited about my meadow. Okay, so I'm a beekeeper, and I went from one colony to 3 colonies this year. And I realized this year that, and these poor colonies had to build up almost everything, because one was a split and one was a package. And a package is a small number of bees with a queen, and they have to build everything in their first summer so that they can go into winter. The point is, I realized after last year and this year and much observation that I had planted a pollinator garden for long-tongued bees and butterflies. I didn't know that's what I had done. I just wanted to help native pollinators. The problem with that is honeybees are short-tongued bees. So a lot of my plants, other than the asters, the mums, some of those, they could not, in the daisies, they could not, for example, phlox paniculata. Great butterfly plant, great wasp plant, great hoverfly plant, but not a great honeybee plant. And I would like to get honey next year. So I am planting a huge meadow in my upper pasture, because I have this upper pasture. I've been letting it grow with native grasses and natives, and it just isn't enough for my bees. So I bought a whole bunch of seeds from American Meadows, and I bought a bee mixture, a honeybee mixture, and then I bought natives of Oklahoma and Texas, and then I also bought I want to say it's a showy mixture. That's not the right terminology, but it's another mixture. So I have a whole bunch of seeds. I have, I think, 25 pounds, maybe more than that. And I also went to it is. I went to a whole bunch of my plants that had set seed, like my milkweeds and some of the other stuff, and they're actually sitting on my countertop and have been there for 2 weeks. And so I'm going to sow those up there too. So it'll be a mixture that not only benefits my honeybees, but also butterflies. And so we're going to plant that this weekend, because it's supposed to get colder and we're supposed to get rain.
So the important thing is, these are all seeds that need a cold period, stratification, before they'll germinate.
Right. They need that, first of all. And they also, when you plant a meadow, you need to plant it so that you need to make sure that you don't have a whole bunch of Bermuda grass up in that area. So some people use glyphosate. I'm just telling you the truth. This is what they do. They use glyphosate to kill off the grass. I did not have a bunch of Bermuda in that meadow because I have been tilling it up for not tilling it. I've been getting it out of that meadow for some time. That's all native grasses up there. And we cut it super, super low. And then we blew off all of the straw that was left. And so now we're just going to run, we're not going to till it because you don't want to do them too deep. You just want to really scratch the surface. And we're going to do that with our tractor this weekend.
Very good. Well, I'm excited to find out more and see what that meadow starts doing next spring.
Right, because I had to do some of the annuals mix so that we would have some flowers next spring, right? Next summer. And then also I did a bunch of perennials. So it'll get better and better as years go on. And I will also reseed it again in the fall. And then next week, I can tell you the book that I read about creating meadows from seed. Anyway, so tell us more about seeds.
So some seeds, like we said, they need cold stratification before they'll germinate. Some seeds need scarification, they call it. The seed coat is really, really tough.
Yep.
And they want to make sure, it has to be cracked or scratched or softened. And so a lot of these seeds get eaten by birds, and then the birds fly and poop it out someplace else. And this helps the mother plant spread and distribute all her offspring much further, and helps the plant spread.
Exactly. There's a bunch of those.
This is why, in some of the trees where birds roost in my neighborhood, this is why underneath those trees, a lot of mulberries will start sprouting because they've been pooped out by the birds right there.
Right.
So I have to clean those all up. And then I was reading about a group of plants that are called pyrophiles or pyrophilic. And these are plants whose seed have to have fire to germinate. And so some pines have a really waxy coating on them, and it takes the heat of a fire to melt that wax off before they'll germinate. And these are often some of the first plants that will repopulate an area that's been burned out by fire.
Mm-hmm. That's why when there is a fire, like most of the prairie in the United States, the Great American Prairie, it had fires quite often because of lightning, and also Native Americans set fires so that they could drive the buffalo to various places. I mean, there's lots of different ways that fires happened, and that's why it's not unusual for this part of the United States to have some fires. And so, yes, some seeds need that in order to germinate.
Right. And so for the winter sowing, a lot of people don't have a big pasture like you have. And there's some ways that people use like old gallon milk jugs and things to set up like a little seed bed, and they'll put the seed in there and kind of cover it with the top of the milk jug, and then set it up against their house or wherever so it doesn't get too frozen solid and everything. And then in the spring, those will germinate, and then they can plant those plants out places.
Yeah, and that's like winter sowing, right? When they set them out and a lot of people do that too, and they do it with milkweeds also. And because milkweeds are hard to find in plants, and so people do their own germination from seed. Plus, it's a whole lot cheaper. And we should mention Nan Andra here, because Nan Andra is the queen, I think, of seed starting. And she has a wonderful blog called Hayfield, and she does a big seed swap in the fall. And she just knows a lot about, you can go back and read her stuff on winter sowing. She does a lot of it.
Yes, she does. And she grows some of the most unusual flowers you've ever heard of. And I think she actually has an Etsy shop where she sells some of these seeds.
She does sell seeds. Yeah.
So we'll link to her Etsy shop if anybody's interested in some really unusual plants. Nan's the source.
Nan is the source. And I did find my book, and we can talk about it in the dirt. The book I read about how to start a meadow. Go ahead.
And then for those who are more interested in winter sowing, we are simply not going to get into it today. They can go to an article we'll link to on this time we chose Pennsylvania State Cooperative Extension Service has a really nice article on winter sowing.
Right. We mix it around. We don't just, and the truth is almost all extension services from your state have great information on any topic that you want that is factually based. And we only have so much time on our podcast.
That's right. So we have some dirt. We have 2 books then. We got your meadow book.
Yes, we do.
And I want to talk about, let's read this. I'll read this poem by Emily Dickinson.
Imagine that.
There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without oppressive toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears a human soul. Isn't that neat?
That's lovely.
Books can take you places.
They can take you places. And in this case, bears isn't like to bear your soul. It's saying that the book or the chariot that's created by the book bears your soul, like takes you along with it.
Exactly.
So it's beautiful.
Exactly. And so the reason for the Emily Dickinson poems today, Dee, is because I just finished reading Marta McDowell's new book, Emily Dickinson's Gardening Life, The Plants and Places That Inspired the Iconic Poet. And so I will give this a big 5 stars. I did give it 5 stars on Amazon.
Good for you.
If you are interested in Emily Dickinson or gardening or the intersection of gardening and poetry, this is the book for you. I mean, Marta McDowell has done a phenomenal job. She talks about the garden that Emily Dickinson had, and she starts in like late winter, early spring, and she goes all through the season. And she intersperses poems and history, and there's some pictures and diagrams, and she talks about Emily Dickinson's life. And you mentioned she was a recluse. She did not start out life as a recluse. That came later on, but it's just really interesting. And Emily Dickinson was just she was a gardener in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Yeah, she was. And because she had a short season, she had a conservatory, didn't she? That's what I've always read.
She did have a conservatory. The house that she grew up in, it was owned privately after her death for a while, and then it was given to a foundation or some group that made it into a museum. And they have used old plans and pictures, and they have restored the conservatory, which had been taken off by previous owners. But it's now a museum, and you can go, and it's faithfully been restored. And Marta McDowell has a whole section on, if you decide to visit, what you might see and places you might go as you go visit the garden there and the house.
Ooh, that sounds wonderful. I really like her books, and so I know she did Emily Dickinson's life justice. There's also a children's book called Emily, and we'll link to it too. I just remembered it. I used to read it to my kids, and it talked about Emily Dickinson's life from a child's point of view. It's a great read along with your kids' book and beautifully illustrated. And it talks about the conservatory and how much she loved plants and how she became kind of a recluse, but she was very friendly to people anyway.
She was friendly. And I read some stuff online about Emily Dickinson after finishing the book, but her sister lived there with her, and her sister might have people down in the parlor, and Emily would not come downstairs, but she would send down a tray with maybe a little posy of flowers and some tea and a couple little candies, but she would send down like a little note with flowers to the guests so that they knew she was up there.
Right, and they knew she cared. I think a lot of it was she was shy, and I don't know, maybe she also had some agoraphobia, but I'm just saying that. I don't know if she did or not. Anyway. I thought that children's book was wonderful, and she was definitely a deep thinker.
Right, and Marta McDowell's new book is fabulous. Emily Dickinson's Gardening Life. This would be a great gift for a gardener in your life who's also into poetry. So tell us about your meadow
Very
book.
Cool. Okay, just really quickly, I remembered which book I read. I started reading this book back in 2017 when it came out. Because a friend suggested it to me because he knew I was thinking about a meadow, and it's called Sowing Beauty, Designing Flower Meadows from Seed. That is the least expensive way to design a flower meadow. Do not try to go into doing a meadow without doing some research because it's kind of hard. So anyway, I just see the quote about it from Publishers Weekly was really beautiful. It said, "A hopeful and expansive book for the gardener who sees a field as a canvas." And I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. So I'm going to try to do a meadow.
Excellent. I await the report.
We'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, it was great chatting with you over the garden fence today, Dee.
It sure was. And everybody, you can find us at all the places you find great podcasts. If you do listen to us on Apple, I almost said iTunes, but they have gotten rid of iTunes under the new operating system. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, if you could give us a 5-star review, we'd really appreciate it. That gets us more listeners. And I just want to say at my talk the other day that was down in Denton, Texas, we signed up many more listeners because we've got some great fans down there, including Sherry Ely, who is one of the co-chairs of that event. And she just loves our podcast and thinks we're funny. So I appreciate that. Also, you can reach us at the Garden Angelus at Gmail. You can reach us on the Garden Angelus page on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And you can also reach us each at our individual pages. Carol is under either May Dreams Gardens or Indie Gardener, and I'm always under Red Dirt Ramblings. We really appreciate you guys chatting with us over the Garden Gate, and we've enjoyed it. Bye now.
Bye, Dee.